Jacksonville, a child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history in this land of flowers.
The week that was from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. We are reporting here on the 30th of June 2018, the last day of June. It's been a very interesting week, as we usually say most weeks are. We'll be talking about polling, and we have a note from Uncle Carl Rove writing in the Wall Street Journal on the Trump tariffs. And the recurring theme here is throughout these numerous reports, DJ Trump is playing to his base. And we look at the base, basically in rural communities and in the deep South. Now, DJ Trump has made promises to these communities, and he's trying to, quote-unquote, fulfill the promises with the tariff regime. The problem is that if you look at it dialectically, the tariff regime is something that is outdated in 2018. It never really worked in the 1920s. It didn't work in the 50s, and it has not worked basically since then. Some forms of economic violence have worked successfully, being sanctions against the Russian Federation, Democratic Republic of Korea, and much smaller countries. But the problem is with sanctions against China. China is a global trading partner, and so is the EU. And when you start talking about automobiles and various other things, there's also a secondary channel. And that's a problem that DJ Trump has. And Uncle Carl Rowe would be talking about the downside to the whole tariff regime. We'll be talking here about some of the models that are out there. They'll be presented in Boston in August in the entirety. We've talked about some of these people before. We'll have Charlie Cook and his Cook report, just basically echoing the same thing. And of course, the last week, before we forget it, the tragedy in Annapolis, Maryland, at the Gazette, the brutal murder of 5 journalists. Now, does that affect the body of politics? Yes. Journalists, like any other profession, unite around the core. And the Trump administration has not only taken on CNN, but he's taken on all of journalism. Not a very smart move there, period. And the people at Fox were literally politically checking the Gazette and found out, this is Gazette in Indianapolis, Maryland, that it was basically a middle-of-the-road paper, not particularly right-leaning or left-leaning periods. It was a community newspaper. And the vendetta there was basically from an individual, Ramos. But the situation goes beyond that, and we'll see how that story plays out on the talk shows this weekend, which we'll be talking about on the Monday Morning Quarterback. And then we'll be also looking to the World Cup, that's FIFA, and where it is. We have an article here from the BBC on what happened to African nations, the elimination of the most dismal setback they have suffered in a number of years. But firstly, let's start with the Reuters story here, and we have Louis Beck and Tenham. Let's go to this. These gentlemen have a history of their models. Republicans might need an even strong economy to hold the House. Well, this is always a very tenuous situation. Our models here at Cranston Analytics been looking more to August as the time that the Trump economy starts to show up. We're now on the Barack Obama economy and have been under it since 2009. Several who use economic data in their models conclude that unless the economy gets quite a bit stronger, the Republicans will not be able to maintain their hold on Congress. The economy is doing well by many measures, but their analysis based on data running back to 1940 or earlier gives evidence the Democrats have a good chance of winning at least 23 seats in the November midterm. One leading model developed by Mr. Beck of the University of Iowa and Charlie Tenham of City University of New York uses personal income tax growth as a key indicator. Another way of looking at it, the model predicts Republicans will hold on to their majority if incomes grow at least 3.4% in the first 6 months of the year. If it did that, it would be a strong 6-month performance for income growth in 2 decades, 20 years. A burst of income growth is possible, but data published on Friday suggests Republicans could come up short. Now, it could, after tax income is at a modest 1.5% in the 6 months through May. That's according to the Department of Commerce. At this pace, the model suggests the Republicans would lose 32 seats. Presidential approval ratings, another critical factor in the model, weighing more heavily than income, with Trump's rating of 42 in Gallup in early June. Louis Beck says the economy has got to really be rocking for them to overcome the drag. Now, DJ Trump is up and down. We'll look at that over at Real Clear Channel. The midterms, two researchers in 2014. Now, it was a different election in 2014. You had Barack Obama, and you had a cloud of pessimism put out by the monopoly media outlets and also in the Congress. So that was a totally different situation there. But they predicted Democrats would lose their 15 seats, and and they lost 13 in their forecast in late July. They're part of a group of top forecasters with will unveil predictions at the Political Science Conference in Boston. Gamemanship has crept in past conferences, with some scholars making small wagers. Well, again, that would be in August. Most rely on polling data of an economic data. James Campbell, he's at the University of Buffalo in Buffalo, will make predictions based on how many House seats are seen as vulnerable by the Cook report. We'll go there in a minute. Campbell was all free states in 2014. So far this year, his model points to Republicans losing over 40 seats. Now, another one, Ray Fair, we've talked about him before. He's an economist at Yale University, says polls don't explain what drive voters' decisions and don't necessarily make for better forecasts. Fair stands apart from political scientists because he uses gauges of inflation and economic growth, reasoning that a strong economy and low inflation favors a president's party. His forecasts currently show Democrats getting 52% of the House races, while Fair doesn't calculate net seats. He's less interested in political results. Campbell and others, scientists, say 52% would likely be enough for the Democrats to take the House. That would be on the margin. Now, if Professor Fair is correct, that would be on the margin, or it could be very, very slim as to what the Democrats would or would not do. Now, based on the generic ballot, 4 or 5% could be in some of those in the margin of error. So be very cautious. Don't get into a situation as what happened in 2016. Much work needs to be done. A burst of economic activity that is growth in domestic product per capita of at least 3.2 is the second and third quarter of this year. Now, that could push the Democratic share below the 51%, according to Fair, who uses data back to 1916. But enough to keep the House in Republican hands, according to Campbell and other scientists. Now, when DJ Trump took office in 2017, per capita GNP had accelerated slightly, but it held between 0.6% and 2.4%. We now have a 2, and this is where things could actually change quite remarkably. Now, this is Charlie Cook writing in his Cook report on the 29th of June. President Trump has given a new twist to the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's famous line, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." In the case of the president, that which hurt him outside of his base only makes him stronger within the base. Someone is going to write a book about the GOP in the first 2 years on Trump and title it "Doubling Down on the Big Bet that Republicans are placing on his appeal to the base, excluding of the outside of it." In 2016, Trump tried to build an intense majority of support and pulled it off, losing the popular vote by 2.1% or 2.9 million votes, but winning the Electoral Congress. Now, this is thanks to Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Now, what happened in both Wisconsin and in Michigan on the Gateway Snyder for Michigan and on the Boss Walker in Wisconsin, voter suppression, and the election itself. The Democratic National Committee's campaign to suppress the Bernie Sanders vote in cahoots with Hillary the Monster Clinton caused irreparable damage to the Democratic candidate in that election. Political malpractice on behalf of the monster. Why did the monster have the so-called server in the first place? When you're running for president, as the monster was, you have to calculate everything that will be in major news. And the monster known as Crooked Hillary does not need to get any crookeder. And then, of course, other things that occurred there, James Comey and his entrance into the election should have not entered in the election. Our take on that was he was pressured by Giuliani and his FBI agent fan club into making that announcement that she was on investigation. Then he came back and said no, there was nothing found there, and then there was some mysterious emails found on Hannah Adon computer. I mispronounced the name after looking. Husband's computer, but those were just the same emails that had been out there. Now, one explanation of that was that his computer perhaps was hacked and those emails delivered to it. That can easily happen. Things can manipulate. And if you remember, he was also on investigation for child, what they call child pornography. Basically, what he was doing was he posted himself to some underage girl, which is a different kind of case in itself. Very suspicious case there. But those things were enough to find those 80,000 votes. In Pennsylvania, a little different there. You didn't have the turnout that you normally would have in Philadelphia. And in Milwaukee, the situation was they interviewed some people at an African-American barbershop, and they were aware of what happened. They did not vote in the election, and they understood what they termed a gangster, that's DJ Trump, would win, period. So those are the things that combined for the 80,000 votes. So when you take voter suppression in those states, probably 20% of their vote was suppressed, if not by outright suppression in terms of scrubbed records, etc., but intimidation at the polls and beyond the polls, relaxing of the number of convenience voting days, etc. And also, the monster did not campaign in either Michigan or Wisconsin. That was a general malpractice on the part of her campaign. She did campaign in Pennsylvania, but too little, too soon. Having defied the experts twice and winning the nomination, then the presidency, he obviously believes this recipe can be replicated in the midterm elections and at a re-election. Well, that's a long stretch. With the House teetering on the edge, Republicans hold a 51-49 edge in the Senate, an enormous number of Republican governorships and state legislative seats online. In November, the Republican Party is betting more on the House, more on than the House on Trump's strategy. Whether you label this the American First or call it isolationism, protectionism, nativism, the Republican coalition is increasingly centered on rural and small-town America, working-class Europeans, particularly in the Deep South and Heartland. The question is whether the recipe will work for him, had worked for him in 16, will work entirely there. Well, that is a different situation. He goes into the Gallup poll on June 18th through 24th. Based on the standard, his rating dropped 4 points from previous weeks, from 45 to 41. Disapproval up 5% from 50 to 55. He dropped 3 points amongst Republicans from 90 to 83%, 4 points with independents from 42 to 38, while his support amongst Democrats has halved from 10 to 5. Well, but it would appear that self-inflicted wounds are coming from zero-tolerance approach on immigration. Now, this is a big problem on immigration, is that the zero-tolerance approach, he's filling up the various centers that they have, military bases, etc., and they have to build some. Now, in that time, a lot of bad publicity, period. The next third mostly agree with him, winking here and there, but remaining fundamentally with him. The final third has a lot of issues with him and is split. Some members are still hanging with him, but with reservations. Now, this is where the Republican Party is. This is the third that Republicans have to worry about staying home in November. A lot of it will depend on what it looks like in November. Findings in the June 1st, June 4th Wall Street Journal poll that did not give enough attention. That did not get enough attention was on a scale of 1 to 10, and I believe we had it here, a very similar one. Those with high interest in the upcoming midterm, 63% for Democrats, picked themselves at either 9 or 10, compared to 47% for Republicans and 44% for independents. In other words, while Democrats have a 10-point lead, well, that's no longer there. Respondents in current Democrat-held districts give Democrats a 22% lead, while those in Republican districts just 1%. What this means is that Democrats don't need to worry about holding their own districts, but a lot of Republicans may not be where today should be. Well, that is a big situation there. For Democrats, the challenge is to think creatively and perhaps cast a wider net for opportunities. There's no doubt about that. Bernie Sanders has been talking about that, period. This is the kind of year when challenges in one party don't give a dime out of their congressional campaign committees successfully knocking off incumbents, while incumbents in the other party lose its 6 figures of cash in hand going into the election because they thought they were okay. And Mr. Cook goes on to admit, this would drive me crazy if I were a Republican in a competitive district, is that just when the party starts to get a bit of momentum from the economy and, of course, North Korea, the president chooses to step on and crush it into the ground. There is no holding on to a message. That is basically correct. Let's just get this poll. This is you're driving me crazy on these dates. The 26th from The Hill. This is a poll. I think we looked at it. Monmouth University poll. Barbara Comstock, been around a long time. She's 10 points behind in Virginia over Waxton. Let's go to Uncle Carl Robe in his analysis. He's writing on the 28th of June, 2018. A lot of Republicans will look at this because in the Wall Street Journal. President Trump is justifiably proud of passing a tax reform last December, telling audiences because of the tax cut you can keep more of your hard-earned money. He's right. American taxpayers saved $75 billion this year and $189 billion next year, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation. Yet the president's tariffs on imports and could negate much of the tax relief he is bringing about. Those levied are not paid by foreign countries or companies. They are passed on to the average American consumer. The Trump tariffs are now clawing back tax savings at the rate of roughly $10.6 billion per year. The level already in place includes a 25% tax on steel. And imports in 2017 were estimated at $23.4 billion, 30% on solar panels at $8.5 billion, 10% on aluminium or aluminum at $18 billion, and 20% on washing machines at $1.8 billion. That cramps what will be coming in on July the 6th, a 25% knock on 118 Chinese imports worth $34 billion, costing Americans $8.5 billion a year. If China relinquishes, Mr. Trump said he'll slap it to 10%. Well, there's no reason for them to do this. Chinese Exports Administration proposal for 25 tariff on 284 Chinese exports to the U.S. valued at $16 billion is still pending. The European Union imposed the tariffs on select American goods after being hit with steel and aluminum or aluminum tariffs. Trump threatens a 20% tariff on cars from the EU. It hasn't been clear whether it would hit only car sales valued at $43.4 billion. If that weren't bad enough, the Commerce Center Secretary Wilbur Ross is investigating import of foreign-made cars, etc. If the administration finds that Toyota, BMW, and a Range Rover are a danger to the U.S., Trump reportedly will ask for up to a 25% tariff on them. This is valued at $324 billion, and it could cost Americans $81 billion. All of these actions add up to $19 billion a year in new tariffs already levied, are pending, and potentially up to $125 billion a year on additional tariffs. Some of the prices will be paid in job loss. The president will have trouble escaping blame for Pennsylvania. Senator Toomey confirmed Mr. Ross in a recent hearing. The plight of Allegheny Technologies, that is a Pittsburgh metals company. It imports specialty steel, and that's all over the place there. Could cost 100 workers jobs. So you're going to see job losses. So thus, part of it also is inflation. The $75 billion this year in savings. Inflation is going up. They'll end up paying that back in home loans, etc. Now let us go back to our. Let me just check on our time here. Oh, we're okay. Let's get the polling in here, and then we'll go to the Denver Post and what's happened to the poor Denver Post. We've had this story setting here for quite a while, and we need to get it out. On Friday, we have a slew of polls here out of California. Survey USA has Feinstein up by 22 points on over De Leon, 46 to 24. And on the governor's race, they have Newsom up by 29 points over Cox, 58 to 29. Out of the Michigan, and that's the target poll there in the state of Michigan. This Republican primary, Pinzer up by 3 over James, whoever James is. And the gubernatorial, these are all Republican. Shutlet up by 28 there, I suppose. In the Democratic primary, governor's primary, Whitmer up by 21 points in that. And let's see, Whitmer would be up by 5 points over Shukely. And in the Massachusetts Senate race, we've been looking at that. Let's see, this is the Republican primary. Dial, I suppose, is up by 11. And in the governor's race, this is in the Democratic primary, Gomez is up by 6. And Rasmussen has him up by 9. On Thursday, out of Utah, let's see here, Ms. Love is up by 6, 45 to 39 over McAdams. So these are some of the polls here. Casey, that is in the Senate race in Pennsylvania, is up by 15. This is Suffolk poll. The governor's race, Wolf is up by 13. The Monmouth poll out of Jersey, 11. Sherrill is up by 4, much closer race there. And these are just some approval ratings. Harvard Harris has DJ Trump at 47, Reuters at 45, YouGov Economist at 43, and the generic ballot, Harvard Harris has Democrats up by 9, Rasmussen and their generic ballot, Democrats by 4, Reuters by 3, and YouGov by 5. In other words, that's so-so. Basically, the only way you can go with that. And on Tuesday, NBC Marx's poll. It's in Florida. Nelson up by 4. McSally up by 2 over Chemtrail West and Joe Arpaio. He's at 21. McSally versus Simmers, I suppose. Simmers by 11 over McSally. Simmers by 10 over Chemtrail Ward, and up by 28 over Joe Arpaio. In the Ohio Senate race, Brown is up by 13. Now that's according to NBC. I take that with a grain of salt, but you don't know. DeWine is up by 4 in the same poll over Cadre. And out of New Mexico, not a lot of polling out of New Mexico. Graham's up by 13 over Pace. I think this Pace is related. I'm not sure. Anyway, Pierce. Sorry about that. Not Pierce. Anyway, Comstock. This is the poll, Mama poll. No, it wasn't a Mama poll. Well, I guess so. Waxton and Comstock by 9. I thought Karl Rove said by 10. Let me just look back here. What happened to Uncle Karl Rove? Or maybe that was well, that was actually Hill. Sorry about that. Blaming Uncle Carl for things he did not do. And let's see if we can even find it. Well, this is an older poll, I suppose. Comstock here is behind on the opponent by 10 points. Conducted, I see, Jennifer Waxton, 49 to 39. Not sure where this is going here. The Waxton primary victory this month. The Cook report shifted the race's rating from a toss-up to lean Democrat. Comstock is leading amongst European voters who don't have a college degree, 50 to 38, but Waxton holds a 9-point lead with European voters and college graduates, even wider amongst African Americans, Latinos, 62 to 31, which is DJ Trump lost that district by 10 points. Now, this poll was conducted the 21st and 24th of a small poll of June. Now let's back to where we were. I guess this is a different poll here, actually. I think. This is dated the 26th. Here, trailing by 10 points. So I'm not certain. Oh, okay, 49. This is the actual release from the people at Mama polling. So anyway, I'm not sure. It must be an error on Real Clear Politics. They have it 50 to 41. So there must be an error there. Oh, well. Everyone's entitled to an error. Let's do the sports. I think, okay. The World Cup 2018, what went wrong for African teams in Russia, from the BBC. Senegal's World Cup exited on Thursday, meaning Africa has suffered its worst World Cup display in 36 years, since 1982. Going into the tournament, there were high hopes for that Africa could build on its display in Brazil in 2014. Nigeria and Algeria reached the second round for the first time. Instead, a continent will be wondering what went wrong as a 15-game result in 10 defeats. So that is a summary of what happened there. Morocco's World Cup campaign was undone in the worst possible fashion, conceding a contentious own goal in the stoppage of the opening game to Iran. 1-0 win, Iran's 1-0 win. Nigeria will have a team for the future. And let's get the scores here. Japan 1-0 over Poland. These were on Thursday. Colombia 1-0 over Senegal, what got Senegal out of the game. And England was beaten by Belgium, and Tunisia outlasted Panama 2-1. And let's see what we have. Well, we have coming up today, France and Argentina. That will be the, I guess, early game. And Uruguay and Portugal will be the afternoon game. So we roll merrily along there. The College World Series is completed. Oregon State won it. So one less to report on. No hockey, no basketball. So on to Major League Baseball. The Cubs were at home in Wrigley Field. Had the Twins there. For window dressing, Cubs 10-6. The Twins had 10 hits, no errors, and the Cubs 12 hits and 2 errors. The Angels were in Baltimore. It was 7-1. The Angels over the Orioles. Just hopeless this year. The Red Sox were in New York. Yankees 8-1. The Nationals were in Philly, and it was a slugfest there. Nationals 17-1. The Tigers were in Toronto. Toronto 3-2 over the Tigers of Detroit. The Brewers were in Cincy. Brewers 8-2, easily there. Mr. Anderson had another win. The Mets and Marlins in Florida, it was all Marlins 8-2. The Astros and Rays in Florida, well, the Astros finally got beat 3-2. Mr. Cole was a loser. The White Sox and Rangers in Texas, Rangers 11-3. Atlanta was in St. Louis and outlasted the Cards 5-1. The Giants were in Arizona. It was Giants 2-1. A very close game there. Cleveland was in Oakland. Oakland 3-1. The Royals were in Seattle. Seattle 4-1. Seattle's in good play, in a good position in the West. That is in the American League West. The Rockies and Dodgers, a game we tuned into, was the Rockies 3-1. Rockies had 9 hits, no errors. The Dodgers 5 hits. There, Mr. Anderson was the winner, and Mr. Hill was a loser. Mr. Davis got the save. The former Kansas City and Cub closer. Anyway, nonetheless, the Pirates and Padres down in San Diego. Pirates 6-2. This will do it for us. We'll reappear here on WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network. As the numbers man part of the concession, we'll be talking about the economic happenings of the week there. Our soiree into macroeconomics. And what all of this means as we enter July, precursor to what the Trump economy will actually be. We don't have it at this point in time, so it's too early to predict what goes on. And then just remember, we're in Q2. Q2 is usually a transitional quarter. It can be up, it can be down. In August, a lot of people go on holiday. Some go on holiday in July. And then we used to have back-to-school sales. Don't have those anymore. But we were looking at automobiles. They make their entry in the 2019 models, usually in September. So those are some of the machinations of there. And we do have the open source report about 95% finished. We have to go back and re-update some things because we've had this report on ice. And before I forget, let's take care of the paper out in Denver. We can find it. Otherwise, we'll have to put it. Goodbye, Denver Post. Goodbye, Denver Post. Hello, blockchain in the New York Times. It's on the 17th of June. They left the Denver Post amidst layoffs in the newsroom. Now the new outlet will be called the Colorado Sun. They will be partnering with Civic Media Company, an ambitious New York startup that aims to use blockchain technology, crypto economies to start 1,000 publications by the end of the year. That is fairly ambitious. Larry Reichman, that's R-Y-C-K, a former senior editor at beleaguered Denver Daily, who will serve as the editor of the Colorado Sun. They have a team assembled there. Won't go into who they are. Reichman and Cofield resigned in May. The Post, which has suffered low morale on the ownership of a hedge fund named Alden Global Capital. The company took control in 2013 after it acquired it from a bankrupt parent media news group. Tension between the Post newsroom workers and it's not unusual there. The new publication will have a conventional website whose data will be written primarily in the secure digital ledgers known as blockchains. Expenses for the outlet will be covered by a grant from Civic, whose investors now include Consent Sync. That's a Brooklyn-based blockchain software technology company founded by a Canadian entrepreneur, Lubin. Anyway, we'll see how this works out. People who purchase the tokens, a form of cryptocurrency, will have a say concerning the project. And let's see, well, that's basically all we have. The Colorado Sun and where it will go. Nice sunshiny thing here. Once the grant money runs out, it will be up to the Colorado Sun to sustain itself. Well, we'll see how they work it out. 13 newsrooms throughout the country. That will be by the end of June. We'll be going back to this story and see exactly where we end up with the Colorado Sun. But it's an interesting way of doing it. I'm not certain exactly. They supposedly will have a traditional website and where the cryptocurrency enters in. But we'll see. $1 million company has not disclosed how much it's a Civic. How much of the $1 million is raised from the journalistic programs. But this is a new and different way of funding, and there are a lot of these people will be looking at how it affects the newsroom. And news, blockchain is a very interesting situation. The Colorado Sun, Civic, some of what is going on here. Now we'll look at the site here and very quickly and see where it ends up. We'll have this also on the open source report because of blockchain. And the interesting in these papers, maybe we'll do a little more in depth and add to that particular report where things sort of overlap at WBR, and telling stories that matter for a dynamic involving a state. Support our Kickstarter. Now they have a Kickstarter going here, and we'll be more on that later. Good day and have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the Monday morning quarterback on a Monday morning. Incidentally, there's a heat wave across the country in the 90s from New England out to even Colorado and beyond. In the Midwest, 100-degree temperatures all over the place. Drink plenty of water. Find a shade tree, air conditioning, whatever you can find. A lake, a stream, you name it.